People think my tragedy began the day my husband died. They're wrong. The real tragedy began at his funeral. With a 5-word text message. As I was staring at the closed casket, a voice from my phone screen screamed at me, "I am alive. Trust no one." My world shattered. I looked at my 2 sons, playing the part of the perfect, dutiful sons, and a chilling question ran down my spine. Who was really in that casket? Remember to subscribe to our channel, hit like, and leave a comment to let us know which city you're watching from as we continue to explore the story. The Crack in the World. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 68 years old. And this is the story of how I buried my husband twice. The first time was on a Tuesday. The air inside St. John the Baptist Church was thick and heavy, smelling of old wood, wilting lilies, and a grief so profound it felt like you could drown in it. I sat in the front pew, a black veil covering my face, but it couldn't hide the tremor in my hands. 45 years. We had been married for 45 years. Samuel and I. I thought I knew what a broken heart felt like. I was wrong. This was not a break. This was a shattering. The pastor's voice was a low drone, a gentle river of words about heaven and peace that couldn't reach me. I was on an island, surrounded by the silence Sam had left behind. My sons sat on either side of me. Marcus, my eldest, placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt cold, even through the thick wool of my coat. David, the younger one, just stared straight ahead, his eyes as empty as the chair where Sam used to sit at our kitchen table. My whole world had shrunk to the polished mahogany of the casket in front of me. Inside lay the man who had built my bookshelves, who had planted the gardenias by the porch because he loved their scent on summer evenings, who could tell what I was thinking just by the way I stirred my tea. It was all over. A heart attack, they said. Sudden. Massive. It took him in his workshop, surrounded by the scent of pine and cedar. My purse, resting on my lap, vibrated. Just a soft buzz, a meaningless intrusion. I almost ignored it. But then it buzzed again, with trembling fingers. I reached inside and pulled out my phone. It was a number I didn't recognize, an unknown number. I stared at the screen, the words blurry through my tears. And then they came into focus. 5 of them. 5 words that cracked the world wide open. I am alive. Trust no one. My breath caught in my chest. It felt like a shard of ice had pierced my lung. I read the words again and again. They didn't change. They didn't disappear. It had to be a mistake. A cruel, sick yoke. Who would do such a thing? I risked a glance at Marcus. He was looking at his watch. A quick, subtle movement, as if he had somewhere more important to be than his own father's funeral. I looked at David. A single tear was tracing a path down his cheek. But it looked rehearsed. It looked lonely. Tiffany, Marcus's wife, was seated behind us. She was discreetly tapping a message on her own phone. My hand started to shake violently. Trust no one. The message was a lie. Of course, it was a lie. I had seen Sam's body. I had held his cold hand at the hospital. But the other words, the warning, it echoed in the sudden, chilling silence of my own mind. I closed my eyes, and the church melted away. I was 23 again, walking into a dusty workshop filled with the golden light of a Savannah afternoon. There was sawdust in the air, smelling sweet and sharp, and there he was, Samuel Vance. He was standing over a piece of oak, his hands strong and steady, a gentle smile on his face as he looked up at me. He didn't say much that first day. He never was a man of many words. He didn't need to be. His hands, his work, the way he looked at me, it was all the language I ever needed. We built a life not with money, because we never had much of that, but with shared meals and quiet evenings on the porch. We raised 2 sons in a small house with a leaky roof and a garden full of stubborn weeds. We were happy. Or, I thought we were, the pastor said. Let us pray. I bowed my head. But I wasn't praying. I was looking at the 5 words on my phone screen. And for the first time since Sam had died, my grief was joined by something else. Something cold and sharp and terrifying. Fear. Whispers in the walls. That message was a stone dropped into the calm water of my grief. The ripples spread through everything. In the days that followed the funeral, our house, once a sanctuary of quiet comfort, became a house of whispers. Not real whispers, the kind you hear in your own head. I remembered the boys when they were young. Marcus, always so serious, building towers with his wooden block, wanting them to be perfect, the highest. David, trailing behind him, happy just to be included. I remembered the smell of the Vicks Vapo Rub I'd put on their chests when they were sick, the weight of their small bodies when they'd fall asleep on my lap. Where did those boys go? When did their eyes, once full of wonder, become so empty? Money changed them. It happened so slowly I almost didn't notice. Marcus married Tiffany, and suddenly our home wasn't good enough. David followed his brother into the real estate world, and soon our simple life became a source of their embarrassment. Their visits grew shorter. The conversations became strained. Sam saw it all. I remember one evening, a few months before he died. We were sitting on the porch swing. He was quiet for a long time, watching the fireflies dance in the dusk. Then he said, his voice low, "Money isn't just changing them, it's eating them from the inside out." His words worried me, but I pushed them away. A mother's love is a stubborn, foolish thing. Now, those words came back to me. They echoed in the silence. I remembered other things, too. Small things that seemed strange at the time. About 2 months ago, Sam installed a new security camera system. Little white cameras, tucked away in the corners of the rooms. "Crime's on the rise," he'd said. His voice casual, too casual. "Just want to make sure you're safe, is all." And then there was the man he met with twice a week for the last month of his life. His name was Arthur Sterling. Sam introduced him as a financial advisor, but he didn't look like a financial advisor. He looked like a man who had seen too much of the world. He had a quiet watchfulness about him that made me uneasy. All these memories were just scattered pieces of a puzzle I didn't understand. But that anonymous message was the frame. Suddenly, all the pieces had a place to fit. The official story, the one Marcus told everyone with a perfectly somber face, was that Sam had suffered a sudden, massive heart attack in his workshop. It was tragic, he said, but his heart had always been a concern. That was the first real lie. Sam's heart was as strong as the oak he loved to work with. He had a full checkup just 6 months ago. The doctor said he had the heart of a man 20 years younger. I knew this, but in the fog of grief, I didn't question it. Now, the lie was a glaring spotlight in the darkness of my thoughts. I thought about calling the number from the message. I thought about it 100 times, but fear kept my fingers frozen. What if it was a trap? What if it was nothing? What if it was something so terrible? Knowing it would be worse than not knowing. Then, a week after the funeral, a plain white envelope appeared in our mailbox. It had no stamp, no return address, just my name, Eleanor, written in a neat, blocky script. Inside was a business card, Arthur Sterling, Private Investigations, and beneath the printed name, a handwritten note. "Sam hired me to protect you. Meet me at the south bench of the fountain, Forsyth Park, tomorrow, noon." Alone, my heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't a joke. It was real. The next day, I told Marcus I was going to the pharmacy. The lie felt clumsy on my tongue. I drove to Forsyth Park, my hands slick on the steering wheel. The great iron fountain was spraying a fine mist into the warm afternoon air. And there he was, Arthur Sterling, sitting on the bench, just as the note said. He stood up as I approached. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice calm and respectful. "Thank you for coming. I didn't waste time. What is this about? Who sent that message at the funeral?" "I did," he admitted. "I'm sorry for the shock. There was no other way. Sam knew his sons were in trouble, deep financial trouble. He hired me a month ago to find out how bad it was. He opened a leather folder he was carrying and showed me the papers inside. Bank statements, loan documents, letters from creditors. Marcus owed over $100,000 on a business deal that went bad. David had gambling debts close to $50,000. I stared at the numbers. They were just ink on paper, but they felt like a physical blow. Sam was afraid. Arthur continued, his voice gentle. He was afraid they would do something desperate. He knew they were pressuring him to sell the house and the workshop. Then, he pulled out a small tablet. He had me install those security cameras, he said. He wanted a record of their conversations. He played a video. It was from our living room, just 2 weeks before Sam died. The quality was grainy. The sound was a little muffled, but it was them. It was Marcus and David. He'll never sell, Marcus was saying, pacing back and forth. He's a stone wall. He is the obstacle. So, what do we do? David asked, his voice whining. They're going to break my leg. Marcus, we handle the obstacle. Marcus replied, his voice cold. The problem needs to be solved, permanently. The video ended. Arthur didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The air was thick with the meaning of those words. Permanently. My own sons. My babies. They had looked at their father, the man who gave them everything, and saw an obstacle. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. The beautiful park, the gentle sound of the fountain, it all faded away. There was only the ugly, poisoned truth. What do we do now? I whispered, my voice hoarse. We need to be smart, Arthur said. They arranged for the cremation immediately. There's no body to examine. This video, it's damning. But a good lawyer will call it circumstantial. They'll say the boys were just talking out of desperation. For now, you need to go home, and you need to be very, very careful. The trap and the thundering truth. Going home after meeting Arthur was the hardest walk of my life. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage, and I, unknowingly, had been cast as the grieving, oblivious mother. Now, I had to play the part consciously. Every meal felt like a performance. Every question I asked was a line from a script. I started asking them, gentle, probing questions. Marcus, I said one evening, stirring a pot of grits on the stove. I was looking at the bank statements. I didn't realize Sam had pulled out such a large sum of money for the workshop repairs. He didn't even look up from his phone. He wanted it to be a surprise for you. Mom, a new floor? He was getting tired of the old concrete. His voice was smooth, effortless. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The workshop floor was fine. Sam loved that old floor, with its decades of stains and stories. The gaslighting started subtly. Mom, we talked about this, David would say, his brow furrowed with fake concern. Don't you remember? Tiffany would chime in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The doctor said memory loss is common after a trauma. Eleanor. They were trying to make me doubt myself. They were trying to build a cage of confusion around me, brick by brick, for weeks. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I imagining things? Was grief making me paranoid? The line between what was real and what was a lie began to blur. Then came the final move. The power of attorney. Marcus placed the papers on the kitchen table, right next to the salt shaker. His tone was patient, condescending, as if explaining something to a child. This is just to make things easier, Mom, so we can handle the bills and the estate. You shouldn't have to worry about these things right now. I looked at the document. It was a surrender, a legal document that would hand over my entire life, my home, everything Sam and I had ever built, into the hands of the men who saw him as an obstacle. That was the moment the fear turned into something else, something hard and cold. Anger. I pushed the papers back across the table. No, I said, my voice steady. I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Thank you. The look in their eyes shifted. The masks of concern slipped, just for a second, revealing the cold calculation underneath. They saw I wasn't going to be easy. The war had begun. Arthur and I took what we had to the police. They were sympathetic, but their hands were tied. It's a strong motive. Mrs. Vance, the detective told me, but the video isn't a confession. Without a body, without a cause of death other than heart attack on the certificate, there's not enough for a murder charge. It felt like a dead end. Marcus and David were growing more confident, more arrogant. They thought they had gotten away with it. That's when Arthur changed the strategy. We can't get him for murder. Not yet, he said to me one afternoon in his quiet office. But we can get them for fraud, forgery, insurance fraud. We'll set a trap, and we'll make them walk right into it. And so we did. We gathered the evidence of the forged signatures, the falsified insurance claims, The district attorney agreed it was enough for a trial. A financial trial. Not the justice I wanted, but it was a start. The day I walked into that courtroom, I felt a strange sense of calm. Marcus and David sat at the defendant's table, looking bored. Their lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, painted a picture of me as a vindictive, confused old woman, lost in her grief and lashing out at her devoted sons. It was a performance, and he was very good. I watched the jury, saw the doubt in their eyes. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. The lawyer circled me like a shark. He twisted my words, questioned my memory, my sanity. His voice was soft, patronizing. "Mrs. Vance," he said, leaning in close. "Isn't it true that this is all a fantasy, a story you've constructed because the reality of your husband's death is too painful to bear? Isn't it true that you wish so desperately that your husband was still alive, that you've started to believe it yourself?" He paused for effect, letting the question hang in the air. The room was silent. I could feel the jury watching me, pity on their faces. I looked past the lawyer, at my sons. Marcus was smirking. I took a deep breath. I met the lawyer's gaze. Before I could answer, the prosecutor stood up. His voice was clear and strong. "Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness. However," he said, turning to the judge, "to answer my learned colleague's question, the prosecution would like to call its final witness to the stand." The judge looked puzzled. "Counsel, your witness list is exhausted. This is a rebuttal witness." "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "we call Mr. Samuel Vance." A ripple of confusion went through the courtroom. The judge frowned. "Mr. Vance is deceased. Counsel, this is highly inappropriate. With all due respect." "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, turning towards the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. "He is not." The doors swung open, and there he was. Sam, thinner, grayer, with lines on his face I'd never seen before. But it was him. He was alive. He was standing there, in a simple collared shirt and work pants, blinking in the courtroom light. The silence was absolute. And then, chaos. A woman in the jury gasped. The court reporter dropped her stenotype machine. Tiffany let out a small, strangled scream. David shot up from his chair, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, and pointed a trembling finger. "No," he whispered. "No. You're dead." Marcus didn't move. He just stared, his face draining of all color, his arrogant smirk melting away into a slack-jawed horror. He looked like a man watching his own ghost walk into the room. Sam didn't look at them. Not yet. He just looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw 45 years of love, a world of apology, and the promise of a truth that was about to shake the very foundations of that room. My husband was alive, and the real trial was just about to begin. The garden we planted. The rest of the trial is a blur in my memory. A chaotic, fragmented montage of shouting lawyers, a hammering gavel, and the flash of cameras. Sam took the stand. His voice, steady and calm, filled the courtroom as he laid out the entire, unbelievable truth. He told them how he had found the evidence of his son's debts, how he had heard their chilling conversations on the security camera footage. He knew they were planning to kill him. He explained the plan he and Arthur, a former Army medic, had devised. It was a desperate, dangerous gamble. He told them about the drug, a rare compound that could simulate the effects of a catastrophic heart failure for a few hours before leaving no trace. He described the terrifying experience of lying paralyzed in a hospital bed, aware of everything, hearing his own sons tell the doctors to let him go. Arthur had used old contacts to arrange for the body of an unidentified man from the city morgue to be swapped with Sam before the cremation. A legal gray area. Arthur had called it a necessary sin. I listened to it all, feeling a strange mix of horror and awe. He had gone through hell. He had attended his own funeral from a car parked a block away, watching through a pair of binoculars, all to protect me, all to bring the truth into the light. Marcus and David were arrested right there in the courtroom. Their faces were hollow shells, the arrogance gone, replaced by a raw, primal terror. They were charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was sitting right there on the witness stand, breathing. That night, after the storm had passed, Sam and I were finally alone. We sat in a sterile hotel room that Arthur had arranged, the city lights twinkling outside the window. We didn't speak for a long time. I just looked at him, tracing the new lines on his face with my eyes, trying to reconcile the man I had mourned with the man sitting in front of me. Finally, I found my voice. It was a whisper. Why? Sam, why didn't you tell me the pain? I thought I was going to die from it. He reached across the small table and took my hands. His were just as I remembered, warm and calloused. Real. Because, he said, his voice thick with a sorrow that matched my own. Your reaction had to be real. Your grief had to be genuine. If they had suspected for 1 second that you knew, that it was a trap, I don't know what they would have done to you. I couldn't risk it. I had to let you grieve me to save you from them. And in that moment, I understood. The anger and the feeling of betrayal melted away, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. We sat there, two old people, holding hands in the quiet dark, mourning the sons we had lost long before we ever knew they were gone. We learned that love isn't always about protecting your children from the world. Sometimes, it's about letting them face the consequences of their own choices. We had given our sons everything, shielded them from every hardship. Our love had become a crutch, a shield that kept them from ever having to stand on their own 2 feet. The hardest lesson Sam taught them, and taught me, is that true love sometimes requires a terrible toughness. It demands that you let the people you love face the truth, even if that truth destroys them. Marcus couldn't face it. 2 months after the trial, we received a letter from the prison. It was from him. His handwriting, once so bold and confident, was shaky and frail. Dad won. It read, he gave us a chance to stop, but we were too blind. We tried to bury him, but in the end, we were the ones buried by our own greed. Tell Mom I'm sorry. The next day, he took his own life in his cell. David, he simply broke. He was transferred to the prison's psychiatric hospital, where they say he still lives today. Lost in a world of ghosts and regret, the story of our sons is a tragedy of lost souls. They had everything they needed right in their hands, but they were always looking outside for more, until they could no longer see the value of what was right inside their own home. A true legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build with your own hands and your own heart. We live in an age where people post pictures of their families online to prove how happy they are, but they forget how to talk to each other across the dinner table. Our family's tragedy wasn't unique, it was just a symptom of a larger sickness, a poverty of the soul in a world of material wealth. In the end, Sam and I had to destroy our family to save its soul. We sold the house in Savannah. The memories were too loud. We moved to a small town on the coast, a quiet place that smells of salt and new beginning. With the insurance money, the money our sons had been willing to kill for, we started the Vance Foundation. It's a small organization. We offer free legal and psychological counseling to elderly parents who are facing financial abuse and manipulation from their own families. Sometimes, a woman will come into our office, her eyes full of the same fear and confusion I once felt. And I tell her my story. I hold her hand and tell her that she is not crazy, and she is not alone. Sam is back in his workshop, not a big one like before, just a small space in our garage. He makes wooden toys, little sailboats and spinning tops. He gives them away to the children in the neighborhood. I watch him sometimes, his hands steady and sure, and I see the man I fell in love with all those years ago. We are scarred, we are changed, but we are whole. We had to burn down our old life to find a new one, and from the ashes, we planted a new garden, not one of blood, but one of kindness. And here, at last, we have found our peace. The House of Lies. I walked back into my home that afternoon, and for the first time, it felt like a foreign country. The air was the same. The afternoon light fell in the same familiar patterns across the hardwood floors. But something was different. I was different. The truth Arthur had given me was a heavy stone in my pocket, and it made me walk differently. It made me see differently. The photographs on the mantelpiece, the ones of Marcus and David as smiling boys with missing teeth, They didn't look like memories anymore. They looked like ghosts. That night, I barely slept. I lay in the bed I had shared with Sam for 45 years and listened to the house breathe. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep. Every rustle of the wind in the oak tree outside was a whisper. I was a stranger in my own home, a spy. The next morning, the war began. It started quietly. As most wars do, it started over coffee. Tiffany had come over early, a container of store-bought pastries in her hand. "Just to make sure you're eating, Eleanor," she'd said, her smile as bright and hard as a polished countertop. My sons were there, sitting at the kitchen table Sam had built with his own 2 hands. They were talking about stock prices. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my movements slow and deliberate. I let the silence settle for a moment. Then I began. I said, my voice as casual as I could make it. I was looking through some of our old bank statements yesterday, just trying to get my head around things. I took a sip. I don't seem to remember Sam mentioning that big withdrawal for the workshop repairs. $50,000 is a lot of money to forget. The conversation stopped. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. David was the first to speak, his voice soft and laced with a gentle pity. "Oh, Mom, you must have forgotten. Dad told us all about it. Remember, he was planning to surprise you with a new floor and better insulation. He was so excited." I looked at him. My youngest son, the one who used to cry if he accidentally stepped on a snail, he looked at me with such sincerity, such loving concern. It was a perfect performance. I felt a flicker of doubt, a cold, terrifying thought. What if I did forget? What if the grief is making me imagine things? Tiffany jumped in, her voice clinical. "Eleanor, the doctor did say that acute stress can cause significant memory lapses. It's perfectly normal after what you've been through. You shouldn't be worrying yourself with finances right now." She was drawing a circle around me with her words, a gentle, caring circle that felt exactly like the walls of a prison. I was the fragile old woman, the grieving widow, unreliable, confused. I looked at Marcus. He had been silent, just watching me over the rim of his coffee cup. He put the cup down with a soft click. "Mom," he said, by his voice, the very definition of calm reason. "David and Tiffany are right. Don't trouble yourself with these things. That's what we're here for. We'll take care of everything." Everything was a lie. The workshop, the surprise, their concern, it was all a carefully constructed stage. And I was the only one who didn't know my lines. My heart was pounding, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. But my face, I kept it calm. I had to. Later that afternoon, they made their final move. The 3 of them sat me down in the living room. In my own armchair, they looked like an intervention. Marcus leaned forward, his face a mask of loving patience. He placed a stack of crisp, white papers and a heavy pen on the coffee table. "Mom," he began, "we've been talking, and we think it's time we made things a little easier for you." I stared at the papers. I could read the bold letters at the top from across the room. "Power of attorney. It's just a formality," Tiffany cooed, placing her hand on my arm. "It would allow Marcus to handle the bills, manage the estate, all the complicated things you shouldn't have to deal with in your condition." My condition, there it was, the final nail. They weren't just lying to me. They were trying to erase me, to declare me unfit, to take my home, my money, my life, and wrap it all up in the neat, tidy bow of caring for their grieving mother. The fog of doubt that had been swirling in my mind vanished. All that was left was a cold, hard certainty. Marcus pushed the papers and the pen across the table. "Just sign here, Mom. Then you can rest. We'll handle everything from now on." I looked at the pen. I looked at the smiling, concerned faces of my children, my flesh and blood, and I felt a strength rise up in me. A strength born from the deepest betrayal a heart can know. Slowly, I reached out my hand, not for the pen. I placed my palm flat on the papers and pushed them back across the table. "No," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I am still perfectly capable of managing my own life. Thank you for your concern." The smiles on their faces froze. They cracked. For a single, silent moment, the masks fell away, and in the eyes of my 2 sons, I did not see love. I did not see concern. I saw the cold, hard glint of thwarted ambition. The war was no longer quiet. It was now out in the open. The alliance of the broken. My refusal to sign the power of attorney drew a new line in the sand. A line of quiet, Cold War. The boys stopped their gentle persuasion, their fake concern. Now, there was just an unnerving politeness between us, a fragile, glass-like civility that I was afraid would shatter with one wrong word. They would visit, bringing groceries I hadn't asked for, their eyes scanning the house, as if assessing its value, not checking on their mother's well-being. I met with Arthur again, this time in his small, dusty office above a bookstore on Broughton Street. It was a place that felt safe, a place where the truth didn't have to whisper. I told him everything, the gaslighting, the power of attorney, the coldness in their eyes. He listened patiently, his hands steepled on his desk. When I finished, he let out a long, slow sigh. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was heavy. "We have a problem, a serious one." He explained it to me in simple, clear terms, the language of a man who knew how the world really worked, not how it was supposed to work. "We have suspicion," he said. "We have strong motive. The video is disturbing, but it is not a confession to murder. Sam's body was cremated. There is no physical evidence. There is no crime scene. All we have is your word against theirs." He let that sink in. "Their lawyer will paint you as an unstable, grieving widow," he continued. "He will say you are confused, paranoid. He will twist your love for Sam into an obsession. In a courtroom, without concrete proof, I'm afraid they will make the jury doubt you. And if they succeed, they could use that to get conservatorship. They could take control of everything legally." The air left my lungs. The small, safe office suddenly felt like a trap. We were at a dead end, a wall of laws and lies that we couldn't climb. I felt a wave of despair so profound it was dizzying. They were going to get away with it. They were going to erase Sam, erase me, and our whole life would be reduced to a number on a bank statement. "So, that's it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They win." Arthur was quiet for a moment. He looked out his window, at the people walking on the street below. "Maybe not," he said, turning back to me. "We can't get them for murder. Not yet. But we can get them for fraud." I didn't understand. "They've been careless, Eleanor. In their greed, they got sloppy. I've been digging. The $50,000 withdrawal from your savings account. The signature on the slip is a forgery, a good one. But it's not Sam's. And the life insurance policy." Marcus filed the claim. He listed pre-existing heart conditions as a contributing factor. "That's a lie. That's insurance fraud." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "These are crimes, probably crimes, but to make them stick, we need more. We need them to admit it. Admit it, they'll never do that." I said, "They will," he replied, "if they think they're talking to their grieving, slightly confused mother who is finally ready to hand over control." The meaning of his words settled over me. It was a cold, heavy thing. He wanted me to set a trap. He wanted me to use their perception of my weakness against them. He wanted me to play the part they had written for me. But this time, with a recording device hidden nearby, my first thought was, no, a mother doesn't do that. A mother protects her children. Even the ones who have broken her heart, a mother forgives. How could I sit across from my own sons, the boys I had raised, and intentionally deceive them? How could I lead them into a cage? The thought was monstrous. It felt like a betrayal of the very core of who I was. I left his office that day feeling sick and torn. For 2 days, I didn't answer his calls. I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by photographs of smiling children, of family holidays, of a life that now felt like a complete fiction. I was paralyzed. Then, on the 3rd day, a letter came. It was from a real estate company. It was addressed to Marcus, but had been sent to my address by mistake. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It was a formal offer, a lowball offer from a developer for the property where Sam's workshop stood. Attached was a note from the realtor to Marcus. "As you requested, this is a preliminary offer to get the ball rolling. Once you have full legal control of the estate, we can move to finalize the sale quickly. Good luck." I read the words again. Full legal control. Finalize the sale. I walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. to the small, weathered building where Sam had spent most of his life. The place where he had turned wood into art, where he had taught our sons how to hold a hammer, the place where his soul lived. They were going to sell it. They were going to tear it down and turn it into condos. They called his life's work his legacy. The estate. It was just a problem to be solved. A piece of property to be liquidated. Something inside me broke then. Or maybe it finally hardened. The last, soft, pleading corner of my mother's heart turned to stone. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. This was about honor. This was about protecting the memory of the only man who had ever truly loved me. I picked up the phone and dialed Arthur Sterling's number. My voice, when I spoke, did not tremble. "We'll do it your way," I said. "Tell me what I need to do." The ghost in the machine. The morning air was cool and damp. My hands were trembling as I pinned my hair up, the same way I had done for 50 years. But today, they felt like someone else's hands. Inside my ear, a tiny piece of plastic felt cold and foreign. It was a listening device, no bigger than a ladybug. In my pocket, a small digital recorder was silently waiting. Just be their mother, Eleanor. Arthur's voice had said to me an hour earlier. As he set everything up, a worried mother, not a prosecutor. A worried mother. I could do that. Worrying was a mother's natural state. The difference was, today my worry was not for them. It was for me. They arrived at 10. Marcus and David, carrying the power of attorney papers like a treaty they had come to sign. Tiffany was with them, a silent vulture perched in the corner of the living room. I had a tray of tea and cookies on the coffee table. The picture of domestic peace. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Just breathe. Eleanor, you can do this. You have to. I let them talk for a few minutes. About the weather. About the stock market. Small, meaningless words to fill the vast, screaming silence between us. Then, I took a deep breath. "Boys," I said, my voice a little shaky. I didn't have to fake that part. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the papers." Marcus smiled. That smooth, reassuring smile that used to make me so proud. "We just want what's best for you." "Mom, I know you do." "Dear, I know." I folded my hands in my lap. The perfect picture of a tired old woman. "And I think you're right. It's all too much for me. I'm ready to sign." A wave of relief washed over their faces. It was so obvious, so unguarded. They thought they had won. But I paused, letting the word hang in the air. There are just a couple of little things, loose ends, I guess you'd call them. My old mind keeps worrying at them like a loose tooth, and I can't rest until I understand. David leaned forward, his face a mask of gentle concern. "What is it?" "Mom will explain anything. Here we go. Eleanor, be their mother." "Well," I began, picking up a cookie I had no intention of eating. I was looking through the bank statements again. That $50,000 withdrawal from the savings account, the one for the workshop. I can't find any receipts from a contractor. And Sam was always so meticulous about receipts. I looked from one to the other, my eyes wide and confused. I wouldn't want some tax person to come asking questions later and cause trouble for you boys. Marcus let out a short, patient laugh. "Oh, Mom, don't you worry about that." He leaned back, confident. In my ear, I could almost hear Arthur's silent command, "Stay quiet. Let him talk." That was just a procedural thing, Marcus explained, waving his hand dismissively. Dad and I had talked about it. He wanted the money liquid to move into a new investment. But he was busy. He told me to handle the transfer. I probably signed his name to a form or two just to speed things up for him. You know how he hated paperwork. He looked at David, who nodded eagerly. "That's right. Mom, Dad was all for it. My son had just admitted to forgery. He said it so easily, so casually, like he was talking about taking out the trash. My teacup rattled in its saucer. I steadied it with my other hand. "Oh," I said, my voice small. "I see. One more question. The hardest one. You can do this. And the other thing? It's the insurance papers." I looked directly at Marcus, I read through them. It says here that Sam had a chronic heart condition. But, Dr. Miller always said his heart was as strong as a horse's. I just don't understand why it would say that. I let my voice crack a little. I wouldn't want the insurance company to think we had lied about something. That would be fraud. Wouldn't it? The air in the room grew tight. For the first time, I saw a flicker of annoyance in Marcus's eyes. He thought I was being difficult. He thought I was just a confused old woman. Mom, he said, his voice losing some of its manufactured patience. It's how these things are done. The companies have so many loopholes to avoid paying. You have to frame things in a certain way to make sure the family is taken care of. It's just a description on a form. It's a technicality. Dad wouldn't have wanted us to lose out because of a technicality. A technicality. My husband's life, his health, reduced to a technicality on a form. I looked down at my hands, unable to look at their faces any longer. The recording was still running, capturing every lie, every casual admission of a crime. I had it. I had them. In that moment, as the sound of my son's voice confessing his sins echoed in the quiet of my living room, I knew there was no going back. I had the proof, but the price was the last piece of my heart, the part that still foolishly. I remembered them as the little boys who held my hand when they crossed the street. If you are still listening to my story, if you have followed me this far into the darkness, please do me a small kindness. Leave the together in the comments below, so I know that I am not alone on this journey. Your presence is the greatest comfort, and it gives me the strength I need to tell you the final, heartbreaking part of what happened next. The Courtroom Reckoning. Walking into that courthouse felt like walking to my own execution. It was a cold, formal room, all dark wood and high ceilings, and it smelled of old paper and stale justice. Marcus and David were already there, sitting beside a man in a suit so expensive it seemed to shine. They looked confident, annoyed, even as if this whole thing was just a bothersome delay in their plans. They wouldn't look at me, their lawyer began. He spoke about me as if I wasn't even there. He used words like fragile, confused, and unreliable. He told the jury a story about two devoted sons, struggling to manage the affairs of their beloved, grieving mother. He painted a picture of me as a woman lost in sorrow, a woman who couldn't accept the reality of her husband's death, who had become paranoid, lashing out at the very people trying to help her. I sat there and listened to him dismantle my life, my sanity, my love for Sam. Each word was a small, public humiliation. I could feel the jury's eyes on me, their expressions shifting from sympathy to pity, and then to doubt. I felt small, powerless, a foolish old woman, just as they wanted everyone to believe. Then, it was the prosecutor's turn. He was a young, serious man named Mr. Davies. He called me to the stand. My steps echoed in the silent room. He was gentle with his questions, letting me tell my side of the story. Then he said, "Mrs. Vance, I'd like to play a recording for the court." He placed a small digital recorder on the ledge of the witness box. And then, I heard my own voice, shaky and hesitant, asking about the money, about the insurance, and I heard my son's. I heard Marcus, his voice so smooth and reassuring, admitting he had helped his father with the signature. I heard David, backing him up. I heard them spin their web of harmless lies, meant only to protect their fragile mother. The courtroom was utterly silent. The jury was leaning forward now, the doubt on their faces replaced by a sharp, focused attention. I dared a glance at my sons. David was pale. Marcus, however, was whispering furiously to his lawyer. The lawyer got up for his cross-examination. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words were designed to be scalpels. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice dripping with false kindness. That must have been very difficult to hear, to feel so out of control, so confused about your own finances. He walked closer, his shoes making no sound on the carpet. "Tell me, Mrs. Vance, you loved your husband very much, didn't you?" "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I did. His death was a terrible shock. Wasn't it unexpected, It must have turned your entire world upside down. Yes, I said again. He nodded. As if my answers confirmed everything he had already decided, he turned slightly to address the jury. A woman, deeply in love, suddenly alone after 45 years. A grief so powerful. It could make a person imagine things, couldn't it? It could make a person desperate for answers, even if it means creating them. He turned back to me, his eyes pinning me in place. Mrs. Vance, isn't it true that this is all a fantasy, a story you've constructed because the reality of your husband's death is too painful to bear? He paused, letting the cruel accusation hang in the air. Isn't it true? He said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That you wished so desperately that your husband was still alive, that you've started to believe it yourself. The room was a vacuum. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I looked at the lawyer, at the jury, and then at my son. Marcus was smirking, a small, confident tilt of his lips. He thought he had won. I took a deep breath. I was about to answer. I was about to tell him that my grief was real, but so was his client's greed. But before I could speak, Mr. Davies, the prosecutor, stood up. Objection, he said, his voice ringing through the silence. Counsel is badgering the witness. However, he continued, his eyes fixed on the smug lawyer. To answer my learned colleague's question, the prosecution would like to call its final witness to the stand. The judge looked over his glasses. Counsel, your witness list is exhausted. This is a rebuttal witness. Your Honor, Mr. Davies said, his voice steady, one who can speak directly to the matter of his own existence. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, towards the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. We call Mr. Samuel Vance. A confused murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge frowned, his face darkening with anger. Mr. Vance is deceased. Counsel, this is highly inappropriate. I will not have you make a mockery of these proceedings, with all due respect. Your Honor, Mr. Davies cut in, his voice never rising, but filled with an absolute certainty. He is not. The doors swung open, and there he was, Sam. Thinner. Yes. His hair was almost completely gray now, and there were lines around his eyes that I didn't recognize. But it was him. He was standing there, blinking in the dim courtroom light, his old work jacket slung over his arm. He was alive. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a physical thing, a heavy, unbreathing presence. Then, a woman in the jury gasped. A sharp, choked sound. The court reporter's hands froze above her machine. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, to let out a small, strangled scream. David shot up from his chair as if he'd been electrocuted. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He pointed a trembling finger, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. No, he whispered, the sound lost in the vast room. No, you're dead. Marcus didn't move. He just stared, his face drained of all color, his arrogant smirk melting away into a slack-jawed horror. He looked like a man watching his own ghost walk into the room. Sam didn't look at them, not yet. His eyes found mine across the courtroom, and in that one look, I saw everything. 45 years of love, a world of apology for the pain he had put me through, and the silent promise of a truth that was about to burn their world to the ground. My husband was alive, and the real trial, the real reckoning, was just about to begin. The anatomy of a lie. When Samuel took the stand, a hush fell over the courtroom. It was the kind of silence that is full of sound, the sound of 100 people holding their breath. The sound of a story that was impossible, but true. He looked older, thinner. There were lines around his eyes that I had never seen before. But his voice, when he began to speak, was the same. It was the calm, steady voice of a man who worked with wood. A man who knew how to measure twice and cut once. I listened, just like everyone else. As he laid out the truth, piece by piece, he told the court how he had started to see the hunger in his son's eyes, how their talk of love had turned to talk of market value. He told them about hiring Arthur Sterling, not just a private investigator, but a former army medic he'd known for years. A man he trusted with his life. Literally, we knew they were planning something, Sam said, his gaze fixed on the jury. We had the recordings, the talk about me being an obstacle. It was just a matter of time. He explained the plan. It was Arthur's idea, born from his time in the field. There was a drug, a beta blocker mixed with a powerful sedative. It wouldn't kill you, but it would mimic the symptoms of a massive coronary event. It would slow the heart down to a crawl, drop the blood pressure to almost nothing. For all intents and purposes, you would appear to be dead. I took the pill myself, Sam said, his voice level. In my workshop, Arthur was parked down the street, waiting. He was the one who made the anonymous 911 call. He knew that in the chaos of a hospital emergency room, no one would look too closely at the paperwork of another old man with a bad heart. I closed my eyes, picturing it. Sam, my Sam, willingly stopping his own heart. The courage of it, the sheer terror of it, took my breath away. He went on. He explained how Arthur, with his old credentials and an inside contact at the city morgue, managed the impossible, a swap. The body of a poor, unclaimed soul, a John Doe who had been in storage for weeks, was put in Sam's place. It was that man's body that I had sat with. It was that man's body that was cremated. And where were you? The prosecutor asked. Sam's eyes found mine across the courtroom. I was in a small room, in a town 2 hours away, watching a live feed of my own funeral on a laptop. He paused, his voice cracking for the first time. I had to watch my wife grieve. I had to know their reactions were genuine. I had to be sure. He let out a long, slow breath. I had to know for certain, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I had to know how far they would go. When it was time for the cross-examination, the boy's lawyer didn't have much to say. How do you cross-examine a ghost? The jury was out for less than an hour. The verdict was a formality. Guilty. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. As the bailiffs came forward, Tiffany stood up, turned her back on her husband, and walked out of the courtroom without a single word. She filed for divorce the next day, but the real verdict came after the judge had spoken. As they were being led away in handcuffs, Sam was allowed to approach them. I watched my husband, the man who had cheated death to expose a terrible truth, stand before the 2 sons he had raised. The 2 sons who had planned to kill him. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. His voice was filled with a sadness so deep it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He looked at Marcus. He looked at David. I gave you both life, he said quietly. I taught you how to build things, how to be good men. And you tried to take my life for a house, for money. He shook his head slowly, not in anger, but in a kind of profound bewilderment. I don't hate you, he said. And this was the part that finally broke me. I pity you. That night, back in our house that no longer felt like a home, Sam and I sat at the kitchen table. We didn't talk for a long time. Then, I finally asked the question that had been sitting on my heart like a stone. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Sam, why did you let me go through that? He reached across the table and took my hands. His were just as calloused and strong as I remembered. Because, he said, his eyes pleading with me to understand. Their plan depended on you being a grieving widow. Your pain had to be real. Your confusion had to be real. If you had known, even a flicker of it would have shown in your eyes. They would have seen it. They would have known something was wrong. He squeezed my hands. I couldn't put you in that kind of danger. Letting you grieve was the only way to keep you safe. He looked down. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you. And I understood. It was a terrible, brutal kind of logic. A terrible, brutal kind of love. We had lost our sons. There was no coming back from that. But as we sat there in the quiet kitchen, 2 survivors of a war we never asked for, I knew that we hadn't lost each other. And in the ruins of our old life, that was enough. The garden we planted, that was 5 years ago. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. The echoes of that day in the courtroom, they never completely fade. But they are softer now, gentler. We sold the house in Savannah. We had to. The whispers in the walls had become too loud. Every corner held a ghost. A memory of a life that was both beautiful and a lie. We packed up 45 years of our life into boxes, leaving the ghosts behind for someone else. We live in a small town on the coast now, a quiet place that smells of salt and new beginnings. Our house is small, with blue shutters and a porch swing where we sit in the evenings, watching the sun melt into the ocean. It's a simple life. It's a good life. It's our life. Reclaimed, Sam is back in his workshop. It's not a big one like before, just a small, sunlit space in our garage. He doesn't take orders anymore. He makes wooden toys, little sailboats with canvas sails, spinning tops that hum on the floorboards, intricately carved animals that feel warm and alive in your hand. He gives them away to the children in the neighborhood. I watch him sometimes, his hands steady and sure, the scent of fresh-cut pine filling the air. And I see the man I fell in love with all those years ago. He is scarred. We both are. But we are whole. With the insurance money, the money our sons had been willing to kill for, we started the Vance Foundation. It's a small organization, run out of a spare bedroom. We offer free legal and psychological counseling to elderly parents who are facing what they now call financial abuse. Such a clean, sterile term for something so ugly. For a child looking at their parent and seeing only a dollar sign, sometimes a woman will come into our little office, her eyes full of the same fear and confusion that I once felt. I make her a cup of tea, the way Sam always made for me. I sit with her, and I tell her my story. I hold her hand and tell her that she is not crazy, and that she is not alone. And sometimes, that's all a person needs to hear to start fighting back. You learn things. When you walk through a fire like that, hard things, we learned that our love for our children had become a kind of blindness. We gave them everything, but we failed to give them the one thing they truly needed: consequences. We shielded them from every hardship, paid off every small debt, fixed every mistake. Our love became a crutch, and they never learned how to stand on their own. The hardest lesson Sam taught them, and taught me, is that true love isn't always about sheltering someone. Sometimes, love has to be tough. It has to be the voice that says, "No, you made this choice. Now you must face it." The story of our sons, it's a tragedy. A quiet, modern tragedy. They had everything they needed right in their hands: a home, a family that loved them, a father who could teach them the value of honest work. But they were always looking outside, at the bigger house, the faster car, the easier money. They were so busy chasing a picture of success that they could no longer see the value of what was right inside their own home. A true legacy isn't what's left to you in a will. It's what's built inside you, with your own heart and your own two hands. We live in a strange time. A time where people post pictures of their families online to prove to the world how happy they are. But they forget how to talk to each other across the dinner table. Our family's tragedy wasn't unique. It was just a symptom of a larger sickness. A poverty of the soul in a world overflowing with things. We value what shines, not what lasts. In the end, Sam and I had to destroy our family to save its soul. We had to tear down the house of lies to find our true home. And from those ashes, we planted a new garden. It's not a garden of blood relatives or inherited obligations. It's one we chose. It's made of the people we help, the quiet evenings on the porch, the shared cups of tea, the simple, sturdy truth. It's a small garden, but it's ours. And here, at last, we have found our peace. And there, the story of the message at the funeral comes to its incredible conclusion. It really begs the question, doesn't it? In a situation of such deep betrayal, is extreme deception the only true path to justice? I'm genuinely curious to know if you would have had the strength to do what Eleanor did. The comments section is our space to unpack these stories. So please, share your thoughts. I read every one. If you appreciate stories that challenge you and keep you guessing, the best way to support the channel is to hit like, share this with another curious mind, and subscribe to Deepu Cater Stories. You won't want to miss what's coming next. I'll see you in the next story. And remember, the deepest secrets are often kept within the family.